Hey everyone, it's me, Ben, or GNC-centric, and today I'm doing a video about the double standards in the way that adults react to a kid coming out as gay versus the way that adults react to a kid coming out as trans. I'm framing all of this in the context of a parent reacting to their child coming out, but I think everything I'm saying can be applied to doctors, therapists, counselors, social workers, teachers, anybody who's involved in the life of a child who is trans. Some of the points I'm making might seem old-fashioned to you, but it really depends where you live, like the social climate where you live. So, first point. This mostly applies to males, but when a kid comes out to you as gay, usually parents are concerned that their kid will get HIV or AIDS, and that will obviously have a huge effect on their health complications, and decreased life expectancy. If a kid comes out as trans to their parents, oftentimes they'll put them on hormone blockers or hormone replacement therapy, which decreases life expectancy and causes liver damage, cardiovascular issues, increases chances of osteoporosis. And recently in a study I saw, kills parts of the brains of females. So it's like really something to consider. Plus, if they're a male, there's still that chance of HIV or AIDS. Next thing. Social welfare. So, when a kid comes out as gay, often parents are concerned about bullying, with good reason. Same thing when a kid comes out as trans. I think for most trans kids there's like kind of two categories they fall into socially. So the first one is they're very popular once they come out as trans, and their identity becomes part of their like personality that makes them popular. So it's being reinforced by all the people around them. So in that situation, their ability to question and analyze is very compromised because all of their social group is supporting this identity. And this is like a kid or a teenager, so that's like very impactful. And the other thing that happens is that they're just bullied and ostracized and isolated. I know in some places it's almost like passé to be trans or non-binary or whatever, and people just are getting sick of it, like having to deal with it, kind of. I've heard a few people say that like non-binary people at their school are kind of ostracized because people are just sick of it. Yeah. And then another social factor is washrooms and change rooms, and gym class. Like, your kid will always be the odd one out, and that will have an effect on them for sure. Also, like a small example I want to give is that teenage females have this like ritual kind of going to the washroom together and then like commiserating about their periods and like giving pads to each other if they need them or something. And I think this is like an important bonding exercise for teenagers to accept their femalehood, to commiserate over their shared anxiety and pain. I think it's important. And if you have a trans-identified female who calls themselves a trans man and who lives as a trans man, they're completely missing out on that opportunity, which could actually help them lessen their dysphoria, maybe. So that's just like one small example of like the social change or difference in the way that a trans kid grows up. My next thing is mental health. So it is true that LGBT youth have higher rates of suicide, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, etc. So, makes sense that you would take your gay kid to a therapist maybe if they were having some issues. And in most of the Western world, if you take your gay kid to a therapist and they have issues with anxiety or something, the therapist might explore how their sexuality impacts their other mental health issues, but they'll mostly focus on how do we help you get through this mental health issue. if you bring your trans kid to a therapist for mental health issues, what often happens is therapists will pathologize, well, this kid has gender identity disorder, so they're in the wrong body. If I was in the wrong body, I would also have depression and anxiety and whatever. So what they do is they treat the gender identity disorder and assume that the other mental health issues will lessen. When in reality, hormones can increase suicidality, they can increase dysphoria, and things like surgery can be traumatic, but your therapists and doctors will all be like, oh, so you're feeling better now, right? You're feeling better, this is what you wanted? And there's no space for that child or that person to really explore because they're just always being affirmed. So another thing with therapists is they really want to be supportive and helpful and like positive. So like they're validating the feelings of the child, but they're not being inquisitive and they're not challenging the child. This is ultimately to the detriment of the child because, say for example, that their gender identity is somehow wrapped up in a convoluted expression of internalized homophobia. If the therapist is not asking questions and not criticizing and not challenging, the kid will never have a chance to explore that maybe it's internalized homophobia because they're just being reaffirmed all the time. So the therapist feels good that they're validating the kid feels good they're being validated, but in the long term, is this what's healthiest? Like, you don't even get a chance to ask that question. So yeah, that's more of a criticism of therapy, but also for parents to be aware of, like, if your kid has an eating disorder and they're trans, like, make sure the therapist is helping them with the eating disorder, not just transition. Because I've heard stories from people where they're like depressed and suicidal and they go to their therapist and the therapist only wants to talk about how the transition is going and how their dysphoria is, but like kind of dismisses the other mental health issues. Also, one last thing about therapists, there's a lot of people who transition within 1 or 2 years of a parent dying, or a lot of people who transition who experience child sexual assault as children. These should be like huge red flags of something is wrong and this kid is it's affecting this kid's relationship to their body or to gender or something. And therapists, because they're so like raw affirmation, they overlook these things, which is like so negligent, so irresponsible. Economic well-being. So when a kid comes out as gay, again, this depends where you live, but you might be concerned about their employability. When your kid comes out as trans, you'll also be concerned about that. And from my experience and knowing trans people, it's a lot harder to get a job when you're trans. Like, first of all, customer service. If you don't pass, you're not going to be hired for customer service. Like, nobody will say this, I don't think, but it's really obvious. If you don't pass, it will make the customers uncomfortable or confused, so why would they hire you? So, like, when I was a teenager, my trans friends, a lot of them would have jobs, like, in a kitchen in the back at a place or something like that, like, where they're out of sight, or they would, after 18, sell sex toys at a sex toy store. So, the employability of trans people is bad. And you have to consider, in a lot of countries, you have to pay for hormones yourself, or you have to have insurance. If your child is going to grow up to have a bad employment situation and not have insurance, that means they're going to have to pay for hormones out of pocket for the rest of their life. In countries like the US, where like nothing is covered for free by the government, you'll have to pay for your own like blood tests for liver function. You'll have to pay for your own bone density scans to check for osteoporosis, things like that, which are so expensive. And then, yeah, a lifelong commitment to seeing doctors, regardless of your insurance situation. So these things can be very expensive. like depending where you live. And then surgery. So a lot of what happens is kids get surgery while they're still on their parents' insurance. So while they're still students in high school or college. And so that way the payment is not a huge deal. But what I've also seen a lot of is kids who turn like 18, 19, who moved out, who are not on good terms with their parents, who start a GoFundMe and they raise like a fraction of the money for surgery, and then they're in debt for years to pay off their surgery. Or I've known people who live in their car while they have a minimum wage job so that they don't have to pay rent, so they can save up for surgery. Things like that. Like, it will have a severe impact on your kid's life being trans. And like if they're in debt from the age of 19, like that will obviously have an effect on their mental well-being and their quality of life long term. Finding someone. So when you come out as gay to your parents will be concerned, like, oh, your dating pool is really small, it's hard to find people like you, like it'll be hard for you to find a partner. Now with the internet and in a lot of cities being like very socially progressive and having gay bars and stuff like that, it's better than it used to be. So I don't know if parents are super worried about that for gay kids, but when your kid comes out as trans, you should be really worried about that, because like, first of all, they will identify as female and look female on the outside. When they take off their clothes, they're male, like, for example. So that really complicates things, first of all. These are the 4 groups of people who I think mostly date trans people. It's a bit of a generalization, but I feel like I need to break it down for some of you. So who dates trans people? Other trans people. Bisexual people who are into or who are cool with someone who's like quasi male female, which is not all bisexual people. Tranny chasers or fetishists, people who have like a fetish for trans people. And then the last one is like lesbians who date trans men, or gay men who date trans women. A lot of the times, at least in the lesbian ones, they're like 2 lesbians dating and then one of them transitions. In those relationships, it puts pressure on the relationship, because when one of them used to look like a lesbian and now their partner looks like a male, they look like a heterosexual couple. So that puts tension on the relationship. With like the fetishists, of course, that's not really a solid basis for a healthy long-term relationship. Like, in all of these situations, like the potentiality for a healthy long-term relationship is not high. I know a couple of trans people who are in the 30s, 40s, 50s who don't have a partner and don't expect to have a partner, and they basically accepted that they're going to be alone. So like, this is really something to consider when your kid comes out to you as trans. And so this is not something that trans kids understand. Like me as a teenager, I didn't realize till I was like 19 or something that just because I identify as a gay man and I would take hormones to look more masculine, that doesn't mean gay men are going to date you because they're homosexual. Like, kids don't understand how limited their romantic life will be as an adult once they've transitioned. And then I have another note about like sexual development of children. So if your kid was like homosexual or bi or straight, you wouldn't have to worry about this. But because your kid is trans and they're on hormones, you need to worry about this. So blockers, hormone blockers, and hormone replacement therapy have huge effects on the sexual development of a child. So if your kid has never masturbated, never orgasmed, and never felt sexual attraction to another person, and then you put them on blockers at the age of like 8, you've cut off any potential for them to have a sexual connection with their body, which could help resolve some of their dysphoria. If your kid is on blockers from such a young age, they may never in their life experience an orgasm. They may never be able to actually masturbate. Also, it messes with their attraction to people. So you're plunging them into even more confusion and uncertainty when they're already confused about their body and upset about their body. If your kid can't have a sexual relationship with their own body, how do you expect them to have a sexual relationship with another person? If your kid is incapable of climax, that will affect their ability to have sexual intimacy with a partner, which is a huge part of a relationship. Like, I don't think parents are thinking about this when they're putting their kids on blockers or hormones. Like, there's stories sometimes of trans men, so females who are on testosterone, who all of their orgasms are painful because they have vaginal atrophy or uterine fibroids or something horrible like that. Yeah, it's just really serious, and I don't think people are taking it seriously enough. My last point is about your kids growing up to have kids. So, used to be, and still is in a lot of places, that when your kid comes out to you as gay, one of your first thoughts is, well, they're never gonna have, like, a husband and wife, have kids and settle down. Now, with surrogacy, which I don't agree with, and in vitro fertilization, it's kind of common for some gay people to have biological children of their own. But also, especially in the Western world, I think it's pretty socially acceptable for gay people to adopt children. So maybe parents think, like, oh, it's fine, my kids will adopt when they grow up and find someone. But when your kid comes out to you as trans, and you put them on blockers and hormone replacement therapy later, you're literally sterilizing them. And when you think about an 8-year-old and you're putting them on Lupron, they can't conceptualize of what it means to be an adult who's infertile. They'll just say, oh yeah, whatever, I don't care, I need to fix my body now. But there might come a point when they're a teenager when it hits them that they will never have biological children of their own. I've seen some parents who want to freeze their children's eggs or sperm when they're children. Your child shouldn't have to go through that process. Your teenager shouldn't have to contemplate such huge things. They should be able to grow up and figure it out themselves without all of these huge environmental factors affecting them. Yeah, like that one is really big to me, that you worry that your kids can't have children, and then you also will sterilize your kids so they definitely can't have children. Like, it's just, the cognitive dissonance is insane. So the whole point of this video is to say, I don't know why adults in general are comfortable with trans kids having a lower quality of life, or trans people as they grow up, just like in their whole life, having a lower quality of life than gay people. Like, I don't think people realize this is what they're okay with. This is what they're okaying. So I just wanted to make some of these points, talk about this a bit. If you have questions or comments or ideas for future videos, please put them in the comments. Please like, comment, and subscribe for the algorithm. My Patreon, PayPal, and Ko-Fi are in the description. Once I have 20 patrons, I will do a live Q&A on YouTube. Thanks for watching my video. Bye.